Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Crypto Economy Podcast. Today I'm here with Naz, who is the host of the Alora podcast. Is that what you said it? Alora?
The founder of
Spell it.
Alora Podcast, yeah.
Alora podcast. How do you spell Alora?
Alora.
All right, the Alora podcast. Here to tell us a little bit about something near and dear to my heart. He reached out about something that I've seen as an issue for a long time, something that's frustrated me for a while, which is the willingness of like certain nation states to adopt crypto, especially those who are going through runaway inflation and economic downturns, and kind of the differences in those that have adopted it and those that have not, and why some of those reasons might be, and how we can push some of those that haven't to maybe take some action to do so. So I'm very excited, and I guess just to get us kicked off, I would love to just hear a little bit about your story and why you're passionate about what we're about to talk about, and what that thing is, why you felt compelled to reach out about it.
Yeah, for sure. I grew up in the UK in Manchester, and from the age of 6 to around 18, I played for like pretty much professional soccer for Manchester United and Manchester City's youth teams, growing up in Manchester, obviously. And I ended up going to college in Chicago on a scholarship through soccer. And around midway through kind of my time in college there, the Lebanese banking crisis happened. And my mum's side is fully Lebanese. And so it hit home pretty hard when that happened. We have a small family business that's run out there, actually making chocolates for people. So literally a chocolate factory.
That's awesome.
And what happened was my obviously my family needed to run their business, and they'd store their money in the bank accounts there and in the banking system there. And the government stole from the banks, and then the banks stole from my family. And so if, for example, my grandfather wanted to withdraw money from the bank account, he'd be faced with an ultimatum of literally not being able to, like, either you lose 85% of your savings, or and you withdraw the money, or you keep it in there and let them carry on and just do whatever. So that's kind of like a little bit about me. I ended up getting through that, getting red pill into crypto as sort of a self-custody maxi and a way to remedy that situation, which is why straight out of college I ended up joining Paradigm, which is like a crypto VC firm for those of you that don't know, and I've never looked back since. So that's a little bit about me. I'm happy to dig in anywhere where it's interesting.
Awesome. No, and I think that's a great experience and a great way to get red pilled on crypto. And I think it's very easy for people in the US to not think that that can happen here, to not understand how many problems it solves in countries like that, and how having an escape hatch where you actually have some other alternative that you can get into can make all the difference in the world. And I think we get a little spoiled out here. We don't quite understand it because our banking system is somewhat stable for the most part, and we have these ups and downs, but it's never quite you're losing 80% in one day. So I guess, could you tell people a little bit about just what it was like? Like, how do you survive at that point? How do you pay the bills? How does the business go along? Like, what was it like in Lebanon when that happened? I didn't have much family left there, and so I just read the news and it saw some videos on TikTok, but there wasn't a lot of coverage, and don't really understand how people were surviving. And so I'd love to hear just kind of like your experience having some access to people on the ground there.
Yeah, it's interesting because my family basically have this small business, and so from the small business perspective, we were impacted. But then also my auntie, who also lives in Lebanon as part of the family, she was a banker, and so we had both perspectives of people like small businesses trying to access the banking system, and then we had someone on the inside that had no control over the banking system yet was on the inside. So I can start by giving like one perspective and then moving to the other, I guess, if that works. So from the small business side, so obviously there were news articles that got released at a time where people were trying to rob the banks to access their own money, which is the kind of tells you how like twisted the situation was there at the time, where literally they were like smashing windows and glass just to try and access their own deposits to not lose 85% of their life savings when they withdraw the money. And so there was a lot of, news publicity just in Lebanon, though. Obviously, it doesn't get published to the rest of the world. And so that was kind of the state of the situation there. So basically, what my family did at the time, and what a lot of other families did anecdotally, was they were literally storing cash under the mattress. And so when customers would come in and, for example, purchase the chocolate, they would take the cash and, every so often, so they didn't like have a massive like box of cash at the store, they take it home and store it in a secure safe, literally under the bed. Um, and that's kind of like that's what would happen mainly for the older, more established traditional businesses. Whereas there was kind of like a dichotomy between the older generation in Lebanon and the younger generation. And the younger generation was smart enough to know, okay, like storing cash in the house is probably not the best move given like the level of crime there and like just the government's corruption. And so they started to like kind of slowly migrate towards Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies as a way to store money securely, away from the banking system, but also digitally as well, because it was very important that it wasn't just sitting there as cash in someone's home. And so you kind of saw this bifurcation of like, okay, we can't use the banking system clearly. So it's either going to be cash or it's going to be crypto. And there was a bunch of Telegram group chats that were created that are like were like peer-to-peer exchanges. And then obviously the classic like decentralized DeFi and like all of that stuff that we know in the US here. So yeah, that's kind of like the situation from the small business perspective. And then transitioning to like what my my auntie was feeling working at the bank herself is she was basically, banks were getting broken into. Her bank was broken into multiple times by people coming up to her and like threatening her, saying, "Hey, can you give me my money, please?" And even she couldn't get her own money out of her own like account. And so she was trying to convince these people, like, "Hey, I wish I could give you everything that you clearly
I feel
belongs to
like, yeah,
you."
being behind the register in that situation seems like the worst of all situations. I would not want to be in that position.
Yeah, and then her like, I mean, her direct reports were like, "Yeah, we can't do anything about it," and so it's kind of just like a chain of command, like not really taking responsibility for everything. And she was there left on the front lines, and even my family was like, before they really understood what the real issues were, my family was like, "Hey, auntie, like, can't we get our money out?" And she had to explain to everyone in the family, like, "No, like, this is way out of my control, like, I cannot." And so it took a while before people actually believed her because they just didn't, we didn't believe her at the time because like it's not something that happens normally. And so that was kind of like from both sides of the coin, honestly. So it was pretty hectic all the way around.
Man, that's fascinating that you get both sides, honestly. And that, yeah, I do not envy having to be in that position. But having dealt with my local Chase Bank, I would have understood that pretty quickly. Anytime I go and I'm like, can I get this chargeback removed? They're like, oh, got to run it up the chain. And you just keep running it up till someone tells you no and says the computer won't let them. And but I guess I'm curious, like, how much do you know about like the origin of why it happened, why it doesn't usually happen, and it happened then? Like, what were the explanations that people were given, and what was like the real root cause, in your opinion?
Yeah, so I mean, to take a step back, there's the corruption and Lebanon are like very synonymous. So the government has been known to be corrupt in so many different ways, and this was just basically exacerbated by COVID, and the country basically going to shit. I don't know if I can say that, but it's done now.
You
Um,
can say it. Freedom of speech here.
And so what happened really was that there's been a constant. So my mum grew up in the war in Lebanon. She was born and raised in Lebanon, and she grew up in the war. And basically, Lebanon has been plagued with war throughout the past, like, for as long as anyone can remember who's ever lived there. And it ebbs and flows. And this period in like between like late 20 like 18 to like 2023 has been like particularly like corrupt and violent, as the people in power, and there was the people in power keep getting pushed out and the new people keep getting pushed in. And then when that happens, the new people in power, they want to try and like recover the economy, and they try and print more money. And when they print more money, everyone knows what happens. The currency gets devalued. But they do it, the faith, it's all in good faith in terms of they're trying to make the country more productive. But the issue is they don't actually know how to do it well. And so, they think they're doing the right thing, but it ends up being, the wrong thing to do in the short and long term, actually. And so, that's what happened really is just that the government was, first of all, incompetent and second of all, corrupt. And they borrowed way too much from the banks. And then the banks realized that they didn't have any money to literally, let people withdraw. They were insolvent. And then that's when, everyone realized that it was all a facade. So basically similar to what we had in 2008, where the banks became insolvent. However, we had, the backing of the US government to help save the economy, whereas the government was the one that was doing the corruption in Lebanon. So I think that's the stark difference between the two there.
Yeah, like I was gonna ask, do you think it is, incompetence, or do you think there is corruption where there's gotta be someone who knows what happens when you print a bunch of money? There's if we know it, there's gotta be some guy, or at least some interested party somewhere. Maybe it's a competitive country, someone wants them to be weaker than they should. There's so many competing international interests when it comes to especially that region. Um, do you think it's accidental?
I don't think it's accidental because, as I said, like a war is pretty much a continuous thing in the country, and so they need a way to fund the war. And with Lebanon specifically, I think a large part of their GDP is based on remittances. So it's not actually the production of the country. It's literally people sending money home back to their families. And so, when that becomes difficult like there's just not enough to sustain the country just from like a production labor perspective. And so they need a way to build these weapons and defend themselves, or at least the government think they do, to fund all these wars. And so, they get more and more into debt the more and more wars they have. And it ends up just, getting worse and worse over time and
Not
compounding.
so different than us after all, I guess. Yeah. No, that does make sense, and yeah, I think that it's. What do you think the solution is? Do you think that they will go to like a more of a crypto-backed economy? Do you think there are ways that they can generally jumpstart the economy with new investment? I mean, I think crypto is such an opportunity for a place like that where they just don't have a lot of economic output. Here's an industry you can, place anywhere in the world. You can attract some of the best and brightest to come there and build things and create regulations that make it easy enough to do so. Do you think there's any interest in revitalizing parts of the economy to do things like that?
Yeah, so I think you can kind of look at it from two ways. You can kind of look at it from the bottom up, people, and what they want, and then the top down, which is like, what do the government want? And to put it like pretty bluntly, the government hate crypto. They cannot stand people storing their money outside of the banking system. And so they've been naturally just like very anti-crypto, not too dissimilar to what we had over in the US, like, just a few months ago until the new president came in. And so you have on one side the government saying, absolutely not, you must store your money in the banks, which isn't like what's happening less and less now because of what we explained earlier. And then you're having it on the people side, where there's just a clear demand for people storing assets, whether it be Bitcoin or even stables, more popular, USDT, in crypto. And so yeah, you're seeing that bifurcation right now. And like the government, the good thing for the people is the government can't really stop it. Because unless you ban like the internet connection that everyone has, like you can't stop people storing money where they want to. And what you're seeing as well is the government tried to block access in the exchange between fiat to crypto.
Oh,
But
really?
yeah, people are smart in Lebanon, and they find ways around it. So one example would be, they let their like people they know in Turkey exchange from fiat to crypto, and then just send them the crypto, over an internet connection. So they use the banking system in Turkey, which isn't great itself, but it's better than the Lebanese.
Yeah,
So
and
they
that
they
actually
use it in
makes
that
sense
way.
because there are just sometimes massive purchases in Turkey, and they seem to be correlated to like instability in surrounding countries. And I actually never put those two together and realized, oh, all these countries are coming to Turkey to actually get into crypto. I thought it was all just the Turks themselves, which is very interesting.
Yeah,
Uh,
it's funny because there's a lot of Bitcoin ATM machines in Turkey, famously. If
really,
you go
I
to
didn't
like
know that.
any of the city centers, there's a lot of Bitcoin ATM machines, which I found pretty funny when I was looking into it.
Yeah, no, that I mean that makes sense. And I think it is like it's crazy to think like my family had to flee Lebanon during the Civil War. They were there for years getting just mortared and hit every night. And they finally got out on like a hovercraft with all their belongings and but in the process of getting to America, all their belongings got stolen, all the things that were supposed to get shipped never arrived, none of the money they brought with them came through, and it's like all you got to do is have like a little ledger and you just walk down the street and get wherever you need to go. And it's crazy how much easier that has become for this generation to do if they are uh you know if they're well set up and educated on how to do it. And I think that's very liberating. And so that's yeah, I think that's I mean I guess what else about the situation do you feel, people need to know about? Are there things that, we need to be watching out for here? Are there lessons that we should be learning that you don't think people have learned yet? Like what was your hope in telling the story here?
Yeah, I think you know, Lebanon is kind of I view it as kind of a potential indication for the future of what could happen if we go into different wars across the whole world. And I think like you're sort of seeing globally right now an increase in tension between obviously the US and China and US and Russia, and pretty much the US and any country over in the East at this point. And so, as soon as you have a war, it's very easy for a country to use that war as an excuse to print more money and go into debt. And as soon as you go into debt, and you start spending more than you can afford, obviously in the US we have a big national deficit already, and it doesn't look like it's going to get any better anytime soon. That ends up leading to inflation, and worst case scenario, hyperinflation. Now, obviously, I don't think we're anywhere near that's the Lebanese sort of, like how desperate times got there. But it is an indication to like, okay, this is what happens when a country has like has spending resources that they
Yeah.
don't have.
I
And
remember in the early days, all the libertarians I knew, that's what they liked about Bitcoin the most, is they were like, the government can't inflate the supply to fund wars. Like, this is a check on the government's ability to do that, which I thought was very interesting. And yeah, prescient.
yeah, I mean, we went off the gold standard for that reason, is we just needed to print more money and like grow the economy was the excuse at the time. And like it has its good positive impacts if used in the right way. But as soon as you start spending money and like doing it like incorrectly, i.e. like spending it on stuff that people don't really care about or isn't really necessary for
I mean,
society as a
how many
whole,
nukes did we create immediately after we went off the
like
gold standard?
I mean.
We couldn't even find a war to fight, so we started a cold war.
Yeah, literally, literally. And I think like two is good enough, for a lot of like it does enough damage as it is. And so, I think Lebanon is kind of just it could be a precursor to what could happen to countries if they become careless, and if they overspend and go too far into debt, basically. And yeah, I guess that's like the kind of high level story that it's not so much of a warning, but just an example of something that of why crypto is needed in this case, and just to open, for example, like we live in a society where we don't really have these issues at all, and we have our debit and credit cards, and we pay and we get our points, and every so often there's a crisis, and we watch TV and see who's affected, and it's not us, it's never us like directly, but we see all the shenanigans that the bankers are up to on the news. But this is a case where it like, oh no, 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 it is affecting like small businesses in a huge way. And yeah, I just thought people, might want to be aware of that and just say, hey, like, even if it is a small amount that they are saving away outside of the banking system, whilst they can, it might be a smart thing to do. Obviously, not definitely not financial advice, but just to help people be aware of something where storing Bitcoin is saving businesses. I think, frankly, is what I wanted to try and convey.
Yeah, no, and I think and you never know. We can have banking crises here. I was around, I was working with all these high risk businesses to get them payments for a while, and we had to work with all the riskiest banks because the banks are essentially like, we don't want to take risky deposits unless we're desperate for deposits, and the ones that are desperate for deposits are the ones who are about to go under. And that was right when the Silicon Valley Bank thing happened, and all of these. I mean, I knew startups who had $1 million sitting in Silicon Valley Bank, and just like
Yeah.
almost overnight, their whole business grinds to a halt. And so it can happen here. The crypto startups I knew never had that problem. You know, their money's sitting safe. They can use it whenever they want. They never get their accounts frozen by the bank who decides some deposit that you got from an investor is like flagged and you can't use it. And so I'm very excited to hopefully getting to do more of that with my companies and make them Bitcoin native. And it used to be investors would tell me, don't you dare put our money in Bitcoin, and they would know. They were like, hey, this kid likes Bitcoin, he might just stick his whole check in Bitcoin as our and now they're like, maybe you should, maybe it's not a terrible idea to have a little bit of a reserve outside the system.
Yeah, 100%. And then what ends up happening if that does happen is, if you keep your funds outside of the system, you're then able to just send it to anyone internationally in an instant. And so, a lot of the fees from an international like remittance perspective, for example, for Lebanon, they like sometimes take like 15% like off of fees. Like I'm sure you're aware, like the Swift fees and
Oh, I
like
mean,
all of the
we
banking.
we did
What?
a data monetization company that was global, and so we were paying out to like 100 countries, and we were trying to use like all of the, I forget what the international version of PayPal was, something like Hyper or something, but all of them, we were using all of them, and it was insane because people would get their money and they would be like, I made $5 and I got $1.50 after the $2 minimum, after the 10, 20, 30% fee, after, and yeah, it was absurd. And so we actually like started to offer crypto payments, which were just way easier, way more effective, got there right away. People were so much happier with them. And so I think as companies also just become more globally integrated, it makes sense because it is just easier. It really is easier. And I think the regulations were kind of the last big thing that we needed, and I think those are in a place now where we can start pushing in that direction, and everyone will become like a crypto native company at some level with some kind of a treasury, probably earning yield in these decentralized protocols. I'm really excited for businesses to be able to lend things out to each other, borrow from each other, people to be able to do that, get your car payment, financed by some guy in Singapore because he wants, a 7% yield, and he'll deal with your credit score being a little lower than the bank. Like, it'll be um, really cool just to get people connected to help each other out in these situations. And it's cool even now to be able to do that. I know there are flash loans going out in Africa and places like that, and it's becoming a real system. And I think um, we really just need. I think there are some parts of it like decentralized identity and stuff that will need to be put in place, and doing that with privacy in mind is going to be difficult but doable. And so it's coming, I think, is what's exciting. But you're also on the forefront of a lot of this stuff. I know you worked with Paradigm, so I'd love to hear just a little bit about your experience there. We haven't talked to a lot of people who have entered the industry, and especially from the funding perspective, and gone to kind of see behind the scenes of, what's interesting to these big funds, what it's like to work there. So I'd love to hear just kind of your experience there, and how you chose that fund maybe over others, and yeah, if you would suggest it to other people.
Yeah, so to give a bit of background, I was finishing college and was pretty much like very, very driven to go into crypto because they're obviously what happened. And Paradigm was I wanted to start my own company straight out of college. But being an international with a visa that was needed made it pretty it made it pretty impractical to start something straight out of college. And so I was just looking at kind of like either funds or startups that would be able to sponsor my visa, that would let me just kind of work, learn the ropes, and learn the industry from the inside, and then hopefully end up doing, my own thing, which I'm doing right now. And so I joined Paradigm with 3 weeks left to graduate. Otherwise, I would have had to go home and get deported back to the UK. So luckily, I ended up there. And Paradigm, we can get into what any aspect that you'd like to talk about, but just kind of at a high level, it was a very, very interesting place to work. it's pretty similar to what you see kind of on the outside, where you have some really, really, really smart people, like Georgios, Constantinople, some we call them internally the CTO of Ethereum, um, and and we have obviously Matt, who's a former partner at Sequoia, and Fred, obviously. And these people are clearly just at the forefront of the technology. They understand it very well, and their investments show it as well. And so it was very exciting to just kind of get like a bird's eye view from the industry from a VC's perspective and see like what they're excited about and just where the industry's going. Like what do founders find interesting, and what are the tooling and like whether it's like consumer focused or deep in. So just kind of getting a lay of the land. And my role specifically was in business operations. So I was basically working as a startup founder within a VC. So if we needed help with diligence on a company, I'd go out and like help with sourcing. If they needed help with legal work, I'd go and help with legal work. And like same with like our internal tools as well to track, like all of our investments, because a typical VC firm, which we can get into, they don't really have any crypto investments. So there's nothing on chain that they need to worry about. But then as soon as you start mixing your fiat investments and equities with on chain investments, it becomes an absolute nightmare. So there's a whole world there that I didn't know about before I joined, but obviously know now. So yeah, happy to dive deeper into any of those areas.
Yeah, no, definitely. And it's funny, I just had an investor send me Matt's profile. Like someone did a full write-up on him. He's like, "You gotta like read this guy's story. It's incredible." And it was something in there. It was like it was Sequoia said it was like the one employee, their one mistake ever. Something was losing him. I was like, that's a pretty good accolade now in your profile. But yeah, I guess I'd love to hear like what it was like working with people like that, what their investment theses maybe were over time, and how you got to be involved in that. Like, were you sourcing deals, helping with diligence, and if so, like, how were you doing that? Were you, watching my podcast, trying to find, interviews with founders? Were you on Twitter, in Spaces? Are you looking at the white papers? Like, what is the high impact stuff that founders are doing that gets firms like that to notice and send you out to look at it?
Yeah, so I first met Matt actually on a ping pong match. So we were playing ping pong together and we're just talking and stuff. And I immediately knew like, okay, like yeah, I can understand why Sequoia might say that this is the one employee that they missed out on about leaving. And same with Fred as well. And that one thing, the common kind of trend I see with people like that is they're just like extremely competitive people. Like whether it's just something like a ping pong game or even like an investment, obviously, just what they do for a living. They're extremely competitive and they always want to win. So that's definitely like a common trend I saw like within the firm, like everyone is extremely competitive and it's fun. Like it makes it fun for everyone. Obviously, it can be very intense and it's not for everyone. But if you enjoy being competitive and like winning and stuff, then and hate losing more so, then it's a good place to work. And then in terms of how like the firm evaluates like companies, is I'd say it's it's very degen. It's extremely degen. Like I think, a lot of crypto founders, they live in the Telegram groups. They're like kind of, anons on Twitter. And you don't really know, like they don't have like a LinkedIn presence and stuff like that, or at least like the ones that we end up investing in because they just like to grind, keep themselves to themselves, and they have probably a lot of stars on GitHub and like they have a lot of activity on GitHub. But it's honestly just like really just events and people reaching out to us with something interesting that they're working on, or Telegram group chats and introductions is probably the most of the ways that we source like deals. We have like a paradigm fellowship which I was involved in from the beginning of just like seeing what candidates would be interesting to pass on to the rest of the investment team. And a lot of what I looked for in those situations were just like cool products, like that people are building. Like, there's a lot of like cross-chain interoperability stuff that was happening whilst I was there. And we ended up investing in a couple of companies around that are on the website. And so, yeah, it's kind of just like, hey, like, what are the really good builders excited about building at this moment in time? And trying to bag the best ones that are, doing cool stuff. I'd say at a pretty high level, that's kind of the strategy.
Seems like it's been effective. You guys have done a good job of picking out some good people, and yeah, I think it's difficult when you got a bunch of like anonymous founders who don't have their LinkedIn's all prettied up, and it's just some cartoon PFP you got to go off of, and so you really got to go off of what is the content, what is the product, how do they articulate the vision, who are they, and I found, but at the same time, like it's not that hard to suss those people out. Once you get them in a room, you talk to them in a situation like this, you figure it out pretty quick, and
Yeah, as soon as you meet these people in person, obviously they're very normal people, obviously obsessed about the problem they're trying to solve. But just from like before knowing them to knowing them, it's like it's like a whole different like
yeah.
gap between traditional venture, as you said.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That is, yeah, I feel like just having that interim stage, but I kind of like that. It forces the product to speak for itself more so than just the founder's reputation, which I feel like a lot of traditional VC is, oh, did you work at Google? Okay, we'll rubber stamp you, and it's not, what have you built? What have you done? How passionate are you? And that's what's always kept me in crypto and in the ecosystem. So I guess one thing I would ask is like, how do you think changing like regulations and attitudes in the US will affect fundraising going forward? Do you think we're gonna see a lot more US crypto companies? Do you think Paradigm's gonna have a ton of big competitors coming out to try and, bid up those deals? And do you think we'll have kind of like a golden age of crypto startups, or do you think it's a little less exciting than that and it'll be, more of a hybrid and more of a slow turn?
Yeah, I think from Paradigm's perspective, obviously speaking on behalf of my experiences there, not them. It was worrying having the administration just like kind of breathing down on X the whole time whilst we were there. And, there were obviously, I'm sure a lot of other funds had the same kind of experiences being like an IRA, investment advisor, basically. And I think they've definitely seen like a shift in attitude from DC, especially. And it gives Paradigm and these institutions much more confidence to take risk. And
It's also nice
when
when half the check doesn't go to legal. It's always nice to a good feeling.
yeah, that's always good, honestly. That's less legal and more innovation, that's for sure. And so yeah, it gives institutions like that much more confidence to go be the firm that they wanted to be when they first started out. Like, Paradigm always wanted to invest at the frontier of crypto. And now AI, obviously, things are taking off there too, and they want to be at the frontier of technology itself. But they made it very difficult. And so now what you're seeing is like you're seeing firms like Paradigm who are very crypto native be the crypto native firm that they always wanted to be and do the things that they wanted to do, whether it's just like just test out on-chain stuff, test out products on chain, which like it was frankly just pretty difficult to do in the previous administration. And then what you're going to see, or at least my opinion, is that firms that are more traditional have like a blessing from the US when you're like, oh, hey, like you guys, like you weren't really interested in this before because it was extremely risky for your mandate and what you tell your LPs. However, now it's just been completely de-risked somewhat. So I think those kind of people will, maybe they dabble in a Bitcoin first and just test the waters out and invest in a few crypto projects just to learn more. And I think what you'll see is the even the LPs themselves will start to get more interested, and the bigger institutions will now like, okay, now we have the backing of the U.S. government, and they're not going to like sue us if we try and do anything. And so you're going to see confidence throughout the whole system, which I think is a great thing for crypto builders in the U.S. Which you saw the trend lines going in the previous administration, which was like it was going down in the U.S. frankly, and it was going down pretty quickly. But now you're kind of seeing like a smile curve, and so it's clear that SF is slowly growing in terms of crypto projects and startups and innovation, and same with other tech hubs like New York and Austin.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, I saw it for sure. It was 2016, 2017. There was so much energy and excitement. And then me and everyone else who was building realized we had to spend $1,000 an hour for two lawyers to sit there and argue with each other for 12 hours and come out with nothing. And it just became impossible. And I think a lot of people just got so disillusioned by the regulatory like unclear regulatory framework, and you had essentially started to filter for people who were just willing to risk it all, and they're like, okay, if I'm going to jail forever, at least, which some level is kind of a baller filter, but also you're gonna push most of those people to Google and OpenAI and
Ye-
wherever else.
Yeah, exactly. And the issue with crypto, especially and payments in general, is if you break the law, for example, there was TikTok back in the day, who technically they broke the law by using licensed music and making turning them into short clips, and then letting people share videos and lip sync off of those clips musically. I think it was the first version of their product, and like they managed to like argue their way out of it, saying, "Hey, this is good for musicians. This is like, increasing the virality of their songs." However, with payments, it's a completely different ballgame where, like, if you're saying, "Hey, we're going to be an illegal payments processor," there's a whole
I,
bunch of
as
fraud
someone who
that.
ran a high risk payments company, I was scared shitless all day doing that. It was like, oh, we actually we're coming to you with this giant cannabis deal. It's gonna be amazing. It's gonna be $100 million a month, but we want you to mislabel all the transactions the way Ease does, because it's so easy to pay on Ease. And I'm like, you realize both the founders got indicted for like wire fraud
No,
and they're in jail. It's like you gotta realize there are risks to doing this stuff, and a lot of people didn't
ex
realize it. But yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And the level of risk of, like, for example, copyright infringement is a slap on the wrist compared to like the punishments for any sort of payment processing company if they found out, like, that you get, defrauded. And even like, I mean, I'm sure people in crypto are familiar with like what's happened with Tornado Cash. And like that is like a huge issue if like anyone in crypto is going to innovate in payments and they see that example, like no one's gonna be
No,
encouraged to do things like that.
I mean, we built out some early decentralized exchanges before Uniswap, and everyone was like, they're gonna lock you up and throw away the key. Do you want to risk it? And it was like, that's a big decision. Do we want to change the world, but maybe go to jail forever? And so that was like a real thing that many people I was building alongside were like very aware of, and it just you don't sleep well at night. And it's sad because so much of that innovation I've seen gone to Europe and Asia and Singapore. People have moved away, but I think they're gonna come back. I think they can get them back. America is the best place to build this stuff, and it's just
When
sad
you
that it hasn't happened.
when Yeah, for sure. When you were doing your payments company, did you end up incorporating in a different country, or did you incorporate in the US and run it there?
Well, no, we were in the U.S., but we were working with banks, so we had banks who were taking on all of the like underwriting and the
Okay,
liability, and we were connecting banks. So we were the technology layer on top of the banks, but we had to negotiate all
cool.
the deals with the clients. So they were all like, "We want to do it this way. We want to find the easiest way." And you're like, "Well, that will go get you in jail." And they're like, "This other guy said we could do it." I'm like, "That other guy is okay with going to jail." There was a lot of that. So that was what was interesting. But I guess one question I have for you is like, how do you see venture capital firms specific to crypto competing with what is essentially like crypto is the opportunity for retail to become the early stage VC. Like institutional investors basically have a carve out that allows them to be the only ones to be accredited and get to invest at this early stage, which gives them way more access to deal flow than anyone else. But if there is the shift where the everyday investor can degen at the $5 million, pre-seed round cap, do you see the landscape changing with the bigger funds and them having to compete more with retail and offer maybe more than money in return?
Yeah, I mean, the history of kind of venture started really with the banks. And the banks would lend out money to businesses and they would go and like, take a bunch of risk and try and make money and, pay back the banks. And so I think over time, throughout venture, it's become, kind of smaller and smaller institutions taking more and more risk. And so now what you're seeing in venture, or at least in the past few years, is there's a lot of solo funds like GP funds, solo GP funds, where you have like two or three people forming a fund, building a team, having their LPs as maybe larger investment funds, and they go out and they're maybe closer to the ground, like layer zero of just like, hey, what are the founders building? Like they can spend all of their time with one company. Because it's, like they don't have the capital to go and spray it to like, 50 to 100 companies and make a portfolio. So they need to pick their bets wisely. And so I think what you're seeing is literally it's getting closer and closer to a democratization to like investing in startups. I think the advantages that VCs have, or I guess the biggest one, is probably just their access to a network of whether it's talent, people, like engineers, hiring. Like they have kind of a whole portfolio of operations that they have, which is basically like, hey, you have like a fully fledged business helping you grow your company. And I think that's the main advantage for anyone that's raising from an investment fund, like a small VC fund in this day and age. But if you're like a scrappy startup founder that doesn't need all of that and just wants a bit of money just to prove out an idea, then raising from these really small GP funds, or even like a pool of capital, if like you have like some crypto projects that are doing it like really early stages, like I think Believe is one of them, where if you're just a founder, like an indie hacker that just wants to raise some money for a cool project, that is the most informal way of raising some money, and it works for some people. And so I think that's what you're kind of seeing, is you're kind of seeing the whole spectrum of investing, starting from like endowments all the way down to like Believe.
Yeah.
And I think it's only going to grow, that side of investing as well, because it just gives more people access to more capital.
Yep, and I'm looking forward to just all these like hybrid strategies where it's not like, okay, you got to choose your path and now you got to do your Series A and your Series B and hit these milestones, and having the hybrid option where it's like, okay, we can launch a token and actually, push some revenue through that token. And I think honestly one of my favorite parts about it is that it gives you like a nice tool to reward your like earliest, most dedicated users who were there through the bugs, who were there from day one, who normally, you just kind of say, hey, thanks, here's like a free subscription or something. But now, like, they can be in on the ground floor with the rest of the team in a lot of ways by, you know, getting early access to rewards and stuff, in the same way an investor can get rewarded for providing their time and advice and money. Early users, I hope, will ultimately get rewarded for contributing their time. And honestly, a lot of them do. The crypto projects that I've advised, the ones who have like these early adopters who are getting tokens, they have like the most rabid, dedicated core fan base on day one, which is very hard to build organically as a new startup. I found that it's just so much easier in crypto to do that, and get people to try new things and give you feedback and improve that sort of iteration loop. And so I think that's pretty exciting, and I think that is kind of going to be like the future of work in a lot of ways. I think as AI starts to take a lot of our jobs, like we're just gonna go, throw 5 grand at a crypto project and go try to be helpful and slowly become more of a part of the team and do whatever we can. If it's making memes, if it's going on podcasts, if it's contributing to the tech, it's a really cool way to just get these decentralized communities together with an incentive to all work together on something, and get to choose what that thing is, and kind of vote with your dollar.
Yeah, I mean, to echo that, I think like the next 10 years is going to be the era of ownership, and taking ownership of your time, taking ownership of the products that you use, because we don't own them right now. We don't own the data on them. And I think that's the general theme that crypto does bring. Whereas, AI is almost the opposite. It's like very centralizing, and, you have a few owners of the technology. But crypto is definitely democratizing in that sense, where, you can give someone a reward for using the product, but obviously you have to be careful because you want the product to actually be useful. And so there's obviously a fine line between just giving people money, and like, how long can you keep the Ponzi scheme going for? And like building a community around a coin is dangerous because you have to make sure that the product is there. So obviously there's a whole bunch of risks to it, but I completely agree with you that this stuff is the future.
Yep, and I think that's the other half of the equation is it's really easy to launch a coin. It's really hard to keep it going for 3 years, and I think a lot of people
Yeah.
launching projects, a lot of people who haven't been entrepreneurs in the past and don't look at it from the, oh, this is a 7 year commitment I'm about to make when I push this button. I better be damn sure, and I better know that I am, operating this community. A lot of investors on the other side don't understand that either, I think. So.
Do you, and a question I have is, do you think the companies will end up ICOing in the future instead of IPOing, especially the crypto projects? Like, do you think Pump.Fun is an anomaly or kind of a precursor of what's to come?
I think that's honestly a good question. I think Robinhood is going to come through and create the like early stage equity. I think they're going to start with medium term and private stuff that you can't get access to, where it is like, my buddy really wanted to invest in XAI. Well, I just happen to have a buddy in venture who happens to have some SPV who happens to have access. So it's like not
Yeah,
everyone has that guy, But if everyone did have that guy, a lot of people would, and that would help improve valuations. And I think there'll be a hybrid there, and then it'll go more into the early stage. And I think in the long tail, I do think you just well, I think it depends on the product, though. I think some you might want, you need more immediate liquidity, and you can create a flywheel where you can keep demand going, and you have enough exposure, and you can capture enough attention to keep it exciting. And if you have the right product, you can do that. Others, I think you might want to wait until you have the right amount of traction before you have people real time trading on it and expecting, immediate outsized returns. If you are on a longer horizon, maybe it makes sense not to get a bunch of people in, 7 years too early and have them sit on it if that's not what they're prepared to do. And it makes more sense to go to someone with a lot more money and partner a little bit early. So I think it'll be a little bit of everything, but I do think retail is going to start getting exposed much earlier, which I think is going to be very healthy because I think there is this perverse
yeah,
incentive for VCs to one, get in early, bid up valuations for each other, and then those valuations get used for an IPO where they ultimately just dump on retail, and so they don't really care what the valuation is as long as they can dump on retail eventually, and so it creates all these wonky fundamentals and valuations. And I think crypto investors are a lot more sophisticated at making sure those valuations make sense, making sure that there are systems in place. I think to do like buybacks in like an automated way is smart. Create like these flywheels where you like uncertainty is what most investors hate the most. So if you can programmatically reduce that uncertainty, um, then I think it'll be exciting for a lot of people. But it's not easy to do as someone who has worked on a lot of crypto companies, like finding the right person who understands how to get the economics right. Like as you said, there are people who run the GDP of countries who don't understand economics, and so finding project founders who understand that piece and how to build it, and how to get people excited about it. It's a new skill, but people are learning quick. I mean, when I got into crypto, no one understood inflation and why you have to
yeah.
limit supply. Like no one understood all these concepts, and now they really do. Like people understand fundamentally how markets work. They understand the liquidity pools and like how much inflation there is over time, and all the revenue buybacks and how those will affect price and about by how much. And um, that's exciting to me because people understand finance in a way that they never have by actually getting in on the ground floor.
Yeah, and the more, the more people get into crypto and you realize the language are just different terms for what we already used in finance. And so once you make that connection, it's like, oh, okay, yeah, everything makes sense now. It's just the same, but tokens instead of equity and stocks.
Yep, I think the key is now taking both of those like buzzwords and all the terminology that kind of keeps people out and just simplifying it and just getting rid of all the
Yeah.
corporate speak and just because the concepts at their core are not that complex. The average, I can tell my 5-year-old cousin about it, they get it. It's like, well, if you have two cookies and now you have 10 cookies, are you willing to just how does
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
scarcity work? They understand that. So I think that's exciting, and I think we're moving in the right direction here. It'll be a lot of opportunity in the near term. And my last question, I guess, for you would be, how do you see like the role of Silicon Valley playing out as this progresses? Do you think Silicon Valley will still be Silicon Valley? Do you think there'll be 10 Silicon Valleys more spread out across the U.S.? I've seen a lot of people. I feel like there's about to be a war between like crypto and traditional VC, where there are these two very differently structured and philosophically oriented markets that might clash a little bit. But I'm curious what you think.
Yeah, I mean it's tough because it still does seem like a lot of the best builders across the world want to end up in the US and specifically Silicon Valley. It still seems like there's a huge demand for, I mean, I know India is booming right now, but a lot of the people there still want to get the visas and come over to the US and work in Silicon Valley, either build their company there and raise some money or just, work for a big tech company or even a, small startup and stuff just to get some experience. And so I still feel like both New York to an extent and Silicon Valley are huge hubs for innovation. I mean, you see obviously OpenAI and like YC, and just like you could still feel the vibe is definitely in San Francisco and Silicon Valley. However, it is very much possible to build a company, a big one, outside of the US. I mean, just take Spotify as an example. It's like they were started off in Sweden and didn't really manage to make it to the US until I think it was like 2, 3, 4 years after they started. And so I do think it is possible. However, I definitely think just looking at like recent history, the odds are with US based companies in Silicon Valley. I still think all the access to capital is here. And I think for founders, speaking from experience, and I'm sure you might agree as well, is one of the hardest things is raising money. And you really want to just be where it's easiest to raise money, because if you build a good product and you have access to capital, then like everything else you can figure out and you can just learn on the job. But I think those kind of two, like a combination of those two things are really important for young founders, especially who don't have that reputation, that a lot of the more experienced people have. So I think, yeah, for young founders, it's really important to be where like shit is going on, basically.
Yep. See, I hate San Francisco, honestly. I hate the density. I hate everything
Fair
about
enough.
it. And I hate that it's like, it reminds me a lot of DC, where everyone there, it's like, oh, your family can afford to subsidize 5 grand a
Yeah,
month rent for you to follow your dream. Like, you cut out 90% of these incredible builders across the world who just can never afford to even just take the first step to get there.
yeah,
And I think that has caused a lot of just this like nepotism, where it's the same few people who are just rich enough to be there and just kind of get in the right circles, play the right
yeah.
game. And crypto democratizes that in a lot of ways, which I like that piece. But I understand also the density of talent, having all those great people around you who are motivated, who are working on cool stuff. Um, that's important too. I think we need more San Franciscos. I really liked when Austin was popping off. I felt like that was a really nice alternative. It was cheap to live there. You had university support. There were a lot of tech companies coming over at the time. Back in like 2013 when I was there, it kind of was having like a renaissance. And I was like, we just need a bunch of these little hubs, like, yeah, maybe
Yeah,
San Fran can be the Mecca, but we need more.
yeah, I agree. And I think also just on that, I think California in general might do it to itself too. Just from like the regulation that they have here on like startups and on big tech companies. Like I think they'll do it to themselves, where people just realize, hey, this place is not hospitable for me anymore as an early stage company. Like there's got to be another place. And people just start, I mean, you've seen Austin as a result of San Francisco not meeting the needs of startups and technology companies in general, be sort of a hub, as you mentioned. So I think that will happen over time. But if they can get their act together, then obviously it's a great place to be. But I definitely agree with you that crypto does democratize access across the world, let alone the US.
Yep, no, and that's what's exciting to me. We'll have all of these indie builders, just like AI is democratizing access to building it, like now crypto will democratize access to capital to get it going. And I think those two pieces together are going to be super powerful, and just allow all these indie builders, developers, people, anyone really, you want to make a movie, you want to make
Artists, yeah.
content, yeah, artists especially. I think it's been, such a small circle with so much talent left outside of it that I'm very excited to see some of those people enter the market, and I'm already seeing some of it, and it's been pretty awesome. So good things ahead. Let's not end up like Lebanon. Let's have more conversations like this. Make sure we get out ahead of it. But I really enjoyed this episode. Thank you so much for coming on and talking to us for a little bit. Are there any parting thoughts you want to leave us off with?
No, no, thank you so much for having me, Mark, and it was a real pleasure chatting with you today.
Awesome. Yeah, it was such a pleasure. I really enjoyed this, and yeah, I guess nothing you got to plug. Or plug your podcast again. It was I'll put the
Yeah,
link in
yeah.
the bio.
So I'll send it. You can send a link in the show notes, but alorapodcast.com is the app, and feel free to give it a try and give us some feedback on the product.
Amazing. All right, I'm definitely gonna give it a shot. I'm excited. I'm glad you got to come build that company finally. You got over here. You got that. Your plan worked out perfectly. So I'm super excited for you.
Appreciate it,
Cool.
man.
Have a great one. Thank you guys for listening, and we will be back with another episode soon.